Thank you. Thank you, Secretary Kang. This special board meeting of the Santa Clarita Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency is called to order. We start our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance, so I would like to ask that at this time you rise as you are able to join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to take a few minutes to go through some administrative procedures for today's meeting. This meeting is being conducted pursuant to the provisions of Assembly Bill 361, which is the one that allows us to hold the virtual meetings. Board and staff, please mute all your devices until you are ready to speak to avoid feedback, echoing, and background noise. Make sure you unmute to speak and remute when finished. I'd like to ask also that all board members please turn on your cameras during the meeting, and staff, please turn on your cameras when speaking and turn them off when finished. Board members will be advised to use the raise hand feature in Zoom when action and discussion items are presented, and I will call on each of you when it is your turn to speak. The public may comment on items covered on the agenda during item 1.3, or may do so at the time each item is considered. Speakers will be limited to 3 minutes per comment. To participate in public comment from your computer, tablet, or smartphone, please raise your Zoom hand when I announce the agenda item you wish to speak on. You will be notified when it is your turn to speak. Please unmute when requested. To participate in a public comment via phone, when I announce the agenda item you wish to speak on, dial *9 to raise your hand. Phone participants will be called on by the last 2 digits of your phone number. When it is your turn to speak, dial *6 to unmute. When you are finished with your public comment, staff will remute you. Please be familiar with the last 2 digits of your phone number. So that's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. We will use the following procedure for approving items and taking public comments today. I will introduce each agenda item, then ask for staff's presentation. I will then call for public comments. I will ask for questions from board members, and again, please raise your hand. The board may then ask additional questions and discuss further, including additional public comment. Once concluded, I will ask for a motion and a second on action items. After any further discussion, the board secretary will call for a roll call of votes. If there are PowerPoint presentations shown today, they may be viewed tomorrow on the Santa Clarita Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency website. At this time, Secretary Kang, I call you to call the roll, please.
When I call your name, please respond by saying present. Director Atkins? Director
Present.
Atkins, thank you. Director Bryden?
Present.
Director Cooper?
Present.
Director Gibbs?
Present.
Director Martin?
Present.
Vice President Gutzeit?
Present.
And President Natoli.
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're moving on to the agenda items. Item 1.3, public comment. This would be public comment on perhaps things that are not on the agenda. And do we have anyone signed up for public comment today, Yun?
There appears to be no public comment at this time.
Very well, thank you. Item 1.4, this is approval of the agenda for today. Do I have a motion for the agenda?
So moved, Martin.
Second, Atkins.
Thank you, directors. Could we have a vote, please, Secretary Kang?
Director Atkins, your vote?
Yes.
Director Biden, your vote?
Yes.
Director Cooper, your vote?
Yes.
Director Gibbs, your vote?
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote?
Yes.
Vice President Gutsa, your vote.
Yes.
President Natoli, your vote.
Aye.
Thank you. The agenda has been approved.
Very good. Moving on to item 2.1. This is a special procedure that's brought about by Assembly Bill 361. Mr. Cole, please proceed.
Yes, thank you, President Foley. I think I'll have Tom Bunn, legal counsel, run through this. It's basically the adoption of a resolution to comply with the Assembly Bill's provisions. So Mr. Bunn, if you can run through it real quick, that'd be great.
Sure. Assembly Bill 361 authorizes the board to meet for the purpose of deciding whether to meet remotely. So that's what you're doing now. If you wish to continue remote meetings, then you would adopt this resolution, which has findings that there is a state of emergency at a state level, and either Los Angeles County officials have imposed or recommended measures to promote social distancing, which is true, or there's an imminent risk. The meeting poses in person would pose an imminent risk to the health and safety of attendees. If you don't want to do that on a permanent basis, I would nevertheless recommend that you do that for this meeting so that we can go ahead with it. If the board does nothing, we won't be able to conduct this meeting virtually, and we'd have to set another date for in-person meetings. Questions?
Do any of the board members have questions? I'll call on Director Atkins.
Thank you, Chair Natoli. We faced this issue yesterday at the SCV Water Board Board of Directors meeting, and we decided that it was appropriate for us to agree with, I'll call what Council Bunn said, 1 and then 1A and 1B, and I'm good with 1 and 1A, but not 1B. 1B meaning that we as a group, as a board, would be in a position of claiming or finding that we feel it's an imminent risk. And I don't know that we are in a position to make that such a judgment technically. So I'm okay with agreeing with the governor's position and agreeing with the county's directive. So I would move approval without the finding of imminent risk.
And that's appropriate, and it will result in your being able to go forward with the remote meetings.
Before we comment on that, I want to call on Vice President Goodside.
Well, I'll second Director Atkins' motion, and just wanted to clarify that by voting for this today, based on the state that we're in today, in future meetings, will we be able to set them remotely or set them as remote if nothing changes? But if something changes, does it automatically become a live meeting, or how is that handled if the LA County situation or the state situation changes before we meet again? That question clear? I guess that was for council.
Yeah. President Natoli, may I respond?
Absolutely.
The authorization today is good for 30 days. After 30 days, you have to find that you've re-examined the conditions and that condition still holds, that LA County officials are recommending social distancing. You're not going to have another meeting in 30 days. So the earliest time to do that would, without calling a special meeting, will be the next meeting that you have in December, or unless we have call for one in November. I think that's open. But in any case, I think you can use the same procedure. The first item of the agenda can be reauthorizing the remote meeting. and you can go from there. Does that
Okay,
answer
and
your
then-
question?
Yeah, and then I guess obviously if LA County lifts our restrictions and the state emergency order goes away mid-November, we would just schedule a live meeting and not do this procedure,
Yes.
correct? Yeah, okay, thank you.
I don't see any other comments by the board members. Secretary Kang, do we have any members of the public who are signed up to speak on this item?
There is no public comment at this time.
Very well, then we have a motion before us. Well, I don't want to assume that Director Atkins officially or formally made that motion to approve this. Did you, Director Atkins?
I did just that. Thank you.
With the proviso that we do not necessarily find an imminent emergency, correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
Right, and Counselor, is that an accurate retelling of the motion that you heard as well?
Yes, it is.
Right, very well. So we have a motion by Director Atkins. Do we have a second?
I seconded it when earlier.
All right, just want to make sure we're crossing our Ts and dotting our Is. Secretary Kang, could you call the roll, please, for the vote?
Director Atkins, your vote.
Aye.
Director Bryden, your vote.
Yes.
Director Cooper, your vote.
Yes.
Director Gibbs, your vote.
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote.
Yes.
Vice President Gutzai, your vote.
Yes,
President Natoli, your vote.
Aye,
Thank you. Item 2.1 pass.
very well, thank you. Item 3.1 is a special recognition for our members of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and I'd like to call on Kathy Martin to make this announcement.
Thank you so much, President Natoli, board members, our whole GSP team and guests here today. The GSP process is coming to an end. It's hard to believe. We've been at this for 3 years at least. And we wanted to take a moment today just to acknowledge the role of our Stakeholder Advisory Committee. They started with applications back in September of 2019, so 2 years ago, excuse me. They went through a rigorous application process, an interesting self-selection process, but we seated a great team that has helped us get to where we are today. Chair Holly Schroeder, Vice Chair Eric Adair, along with Matt Carpenter, Sandra Cattell, Stacy Fortner, Roy Marson, Dan Mesnada, Dennis Ostrom, and Steve Sly. This group represented a variety of stakeholders who all have and need a say in how the groundwater sustainability plan is developed. This group attended 16 meetings as well as 6 public workshops. They read through hundreds, maybe thousands of pages of information that was provided to them and listened to hours of explanation by our experts to help decipher some rather technical information that we gave them. And they did it with attention and with care and concern, and really took their role seriously. And we're really appreciative of that. If we were meeting in person, we would be doing this part in person too, but we just wanted to acknowledge the committee members. We have mailed a certificate to each of them. Let me bring that up here quick and I'll share it so you can see. Hold on. Sorry, I've got all kinds of notifications popping up as I go to share that screen and stuff popping from it. All right, here we go. So a certificate has been mailed to each of them saying thank you for your dedication and service to the Santa Clarita Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency as the chair of or a member of the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, and for your contributions to the Groundwater Sustainability Plan signed by President Natoli and Vice President Goodsite. So we just want to take a moment, acknowledge them from us at the staff level as well. And I know I wanted to give Tara a minute to say a few words. She's had probably the most contact with them and direct dealings with them. So Tara, if you would like to add to that.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And as I said in the final stakeholder advisory committee meeting, thank you so much for this opportunity to work with you as we develop this incredibly important plan moving forward. It's been a delight, and though we may not have always agreed, I feel like we always handled ourselves well, and I really cannot thank you enough for that. These discussions are often heated, and the way that this committee came together to really build something that I feel like is very beautiful, I'm very both proud to be a part of and grateful for your participation in. So thank you again. I feel like I've left with quite a few new friends, and I look forward to seeing you guys around town.
Back to you, President Natoli.
Thank you, both Ms. Martin and Ms. Bravo. This is public outreach and interaction is always a process, quite a process. And when you have 16 meetings of a large advisory committee, that takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of administrative skills. It takes a lot of juggling, and for both the participants and the members of Tara's team and Kathy's team who worked on this, bravo to all of you to stay engaged and to stay informed and to stay involved and to continue through this entire process is a testament to your willingness to work in your valley and work in the valley to make it a great place to live. I just did want to kind of clarify one thing that Ms. Martin said. The GSP process is not coming to an end in total. The GSP development process is coming to an end, but as most of you know, this is actually a never-ending process. We have annual reports that need to be filed with the state of California and updates at the minimum every 5 years to the plan. So the initial development phase may be coming to an end, but there will be a lot of work to do for a lot of years on this. And I hope everyone stays involved. So really kudos to everyone. I'd like to open it up to the other directors to ask if any of you have any comments you would like to make about this very important committee that's been helping with the development of our GSP. Vice President Goodside.
Well, I echo a lot of what you said, President Natoli. This is was a time commitment. And I appreciate everybody, sticking through it and having the representation of different groups in Santa Cruz. I think, in all my years of living here, this was one of the few occasions when we had a broad spectrum of interests working together. And, that in and of itself is pretty darn cool. But even more, I appreciate people that were not necessarily always involved in the water, taking the time out to learn more about it. I hope that, you continue to participate and bring some of this knowledge out to the community, because it certainly was a process. We all know what geologic cross sections look like and things like that now. And, welcome to the water world, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Vice President Goodside. Director Martin.
Thank you, President Natoli. I just want to add my words of thank you to, well, I'll start with the staff, to Rick and his staff, to Kathy, to Tara, and to the committee for the effort and time they put in as volunteers. It's tough to get a volunteer group together that'll stay with it through 16 meetings, some very demanding technical presentations. A lot of prep time was required. And they didn't always agree, but we heard from all voices in the Valley, and that's what was important to this process. And so a special thanks to Chair Schroeder. She really did a heck of a job as chairman of that committee to keep all the folks on that team headed in the right direction. And so we definitely appreciate their effort. This was important to the process, and I want to thank each and every one of them. That's my comment.
Thank you, Director Martin. I echo your sentiments as well. It's a testament to both staff and the residents of the valley. It really is. So again, thank you. And those are certificates you should frame and put on the wall. It says a lot about what you've been doing for the past year. Moving on to item 4. This is the approval of the consent calendar. The only item on the consent calendar is our minutes from our previous meeting. Do any of the directors have any comments on any of the minutes?
So move adoption of the consent calendar. Director Cooper.
If I could first ensure that we don't have any public comment on the consent
Sure.
calendar.
There is no public comment.
Very good. Thank you. All right, we have a motion by Director Cooper. Do we have a second?
Second,
Director Atkins, second by Director Atkins. Secretary Kang, could you call the roll, please?
Director Atkins, your vote?
yes.
Director Biden, your vote?
Yes.
Director Cooper, your vote?
Yes.
Director Gibbs, your vote?
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote?
Yes,
Vice President Guthart, your vote?
Yes.
President Otola, your vote?
Aye.
Thank you. This item has passed.
Very well, thank you. All right, moving on to item 5, discussion and or action items. Item 5.1, we get to hear from Ms. Bravo again. Ms. Bravo, please proceed. Perhaps I will hold this item. We do not hear you, Ms. Bravo. I see your
Oh,
camera.
sorry. I was muted. All right, great.
Nope.
So feedback report.
Yes, feedback reports are always appreciated when you're unmuted. So
Yes.
please proceed.
Outreach requires speaking. All right. So this is the feedback report as presented to the Stakeholder Advisory Committee with a couple of additions based on some online feedback forms that we received after the last meeting. Meeting at a glance, which you're pretty familiar with. Total participants are 38. Feedback, questions, comments were 10. And the feedback forms submitted originally were 0, so we have new ones. So this is the world of, and I know you guys are familiar with this, is the world of everything we heard. Let's get into it a little bit more. Under the slide, when conditions, considerations when triggers are reached, how will survivability be assessed with respect to this question? Will the vegetation and sensitive species survive the temporary loss of access to groundwater? And that was addressed at the meeting, at the public workshop. And then this was a great job to everyone who created the plan, which is a really fantastic thing to have. I think at this point, further water system connections are not advised. So again, getting to the planning part of housing planning part of not really this plan, but generally like what's responsible the city might be responsible for. So this isn't part of the groundwater sustainability plan, but it is a comment that we've heard both here and then online. It has been pretty consistent. As the imported water supply is likely to see future restrictions due to climate change and drought, our city planning team members, again, city considering curtailing additional home building permits. So again, really focused more on the city planning piece of it, which we addressed at the meeting, that's more a city planning purview than the groundwater sustainability plan. And then again, the water levels set too low, which we've heard a few times. So online feedback, I've included the dates that we received it. So this was originally presented on the 8th of September. So the first one was on the 17th. Again, housing, And then another one on the 18th, HOAs reducing landscape water use. So new swimming pools, again, planning. 10-7, stop further development. So you can sort of see the theme here. And then 10-19, stop approving new development. So mostly city planning focused, nothing particularly pertaining to the plan as we've presented it. Again, as we've talked a million times, general statements have been taken into consideration, and we've made recommendations, and there's actually a lot of recommendations that we've looked at and will be presented by Rick shortly. So I'm super excited about addressing those at that point in time. And that's it.
Thank you. Secretary Kang, do we have anybody signed up for public comment on this item?
There is no public comment at this time.
Right, and would any of the directors like to pose a question or have a comment for Ms. Bravo? All right, seeing none. Thank you very much, Tara. You've done a lot of work on our plan, and yes, I think you're an honorary Valley resident now.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Moving on to item 5.2, discussion of the draft groundwater sustainability plan. Mr. Viergoots, please proceed.
Thank you, President Natoli. Okay. Do you see the opening slide on my screen? Good. I
Yep.
see the thumbs up. Way to go. All right. Well, let's jump into it. So we have come a long way with release of the draft GSP. Today's an opportunity to review the draft GSP with your board and also consider the stakeholder input that we've heard so far at a high level. We also want to take some time today to go through the proposed sustainable management criteria. We're going to spend a little bit more time on the sustainable management criteria for interconnected surface water and groundwater dependent ecosystems. And based on the volume of comments we've received on that, we are going to suggest to your board that we have another meeting with your board in November to drill down into these details a little bit further. And we can talk about that at the end of this presentation, but I just wanted to tell you that we are thinking that would be helpful for your board and stakeholders. So let me jump in here. For those of you that are new to this process, the state did enact the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act in 2014. It had concerns about sustainability statewide, and it created this legislation that requires groundwater sustainability plans be developed statewide. It covers the whole state. There are over 140 or so plans being developed right now, and it's been a big effort. One of the common themes in it was to standardize the way groundwater is managed in California while allowing for local control in plan development. There are a number of activities that lead towards plan development. We've shared this with your board in the past. I won't go into it in detail, but we began at the bottom with outreach, and we've been working our way up the stair step with ongoing outreach, different studies. Clearly, we're at the point where the draft GSP has been released, and we're talking about that today. Ultimately heading towards board adoption, and then after that, implementation of the plan. Your board, of course, was formed in 2017. It operates under a joint powers agreement. And our board, your board, meets quarterly or as needed. Your board also created the Stakeholder Advisory Committee meeting in order to provide input from different perspectives to the process. And we've talked about that earlier on item 3.1 today, but good effort there with representation of different interests in the basin. and quite a lot of work conducted by that committee. Here is a quick slide of some of the meetings. We had public workshops from June 2020 all the way through August 2021 on different technical reports. And front and back of those workshops, we had stakeholder advisory committee meetings to make sure that we were understanding their interests and communicating clearly. So what we've done with this is we've moved on from, or as part of the process, we've created the sustainability goal for the basin. I'm going to show that on the next slide. The sustainability goal in the next slide, it reflects stakeholder input. It describes our goal, measures to reach or obtain sustainability, and how we're going to achieve it. This is just the beginning of the sustainability goal from the plan. I'll take just a minute for you to look at that. And it continues on from here for a couple more paragraphs. It goes on to describe that the plan has two main objectives: to maintain water supply for municipal, agricultural, and domestic use in times of climate change and variability of imported supply, and also importantly to protect groundwater dependent ecosystems from permanent harm caused by groundwater pumping. Let's talk about some of the key terms, of which there are many. This isn't meant to be a presentation on terms, thankfully. We'll walk you through it. But the GSPs are obviously these long-term planning documents. As President Natoli said, yes, we're nearing the end of preparation of the plan, but it's going to continue on after that. The plans are designed to maintain or reach sustainability within 20 years and beyond. And the state has set forward criteria on how to measure sustainability, and we're going to get into that in a minute here. But the state starts at a high level with, okay, determine what your basin's sustainability goal is, look at 6 sustainability indicators, determine what undesirable results to those would be, and figure out a plan to eliminate those within the 20-year period. Here's a graphic I believe your board has seen before. We'll use these icons off and on during today's presentation. Each icon represents one of the Department of Water Resources sustainability indicators, and in particular, undesirable results to those sustainability indicators. So, for example, they have a slide here showing land subsidence in the bottom. Well, clearly, if land subsidence was enough to create a crack in the California aqueduct, that would be considered an undesirable result. Process. We've been down a long road. You've seen this slide before. We've started with basin conditions and moved through the goal, evaluated undesirable results, and then began to set thresholds and measurable objectives, interim milestones. And at the end of that process, we look and we say, okay, do we have our arms around this? Is it possible that there could be undesirable results with this? And if there are, what kind of projects and management actions do we have? And so we developed management actions in case it looks like undesirable results are going to take place. And we also may develop projects in the future. There's some iteration. Is it implementable? Is it affordable? And we've gone through the process to develop the criteria. And that's rolled into the draft GSP, of course. How do we measure it? Well, we measure it a number of different ways, such as tracking groundwater elevations or land surface elevations. If we find exceedance of minimum thresholds takes place and we see that multiple minimum thresholds have been exceeded as defined in the plan, then an undesirable result would have taken place. That occurrence would cause management actions to kick into gear. But as you'll see later in this presentation, we're not planning to wait until undesirable results take place. Of course, we're looking to evaluate and implement management actions ahead of time if it looks like undesirable results are anticipated. And you can see that on this bullet down below. A lot of ongoing monitoring and study will be needed. Okay, now I'm going to move into the proposed sustainable management criteria. And we're going to use this table format to cover 3 slides. And then when we toggle to the ones on depletion of interconnected surface water and groundwater dependent ecosystem, we're going to use a little different format. Same organization and how we talk about it, but we'll use a few more slides for that. So the first grouping here, it's actually a twofer. It's for chronic lowering of water levels and for chronic reduction in groundwater storage. And these are really a high-level summary of the criteria. The specific details are in the plan, but the objective is to maintain groundwater levels in order to support groundwater use and the river habitat. We have a minimum threshold, which is the lowest future water levels. How do we measure undesirable results? Well, if we see that groundwater levels drop below these minimum thresholds over a 3-year period in a certain number of wells, then we determine that an undesirable result has taken place. Where do we want to be in the future? That's the measurable objective. Well, we want to be right where the average water levels are in the future, because that is a sustainable approach. If we do trend towards undesirable results, though, management actions would be called upon. They include, but are not necessarily limited to, redistribution of pumping, reduced pumping, possibly releases of water from the lake or bringing in more imported water, and even water conservation measures in order to allow the groundwater levels to come back up. Now we're going to move on to land subsidence. So the objective here is to reduce or prevent land subsidence that would cause significant and unreasonable effects, both to our aquifers, such as through compression of the aquifer skeleton and reducing storage, or surface land uses like large depressions in topography that could cause pipes to not drain properly or even breakage of items. Our minimum threshold is set based on current land surface elevations. Undesirable results would be anything that comes from subsidence caused by groundwater extraction that interferes with critical infrastructure. Where do we want to be in the future with the measurable objectives? We want to maintain current ground surface elevations. If we start to see that an undesirable result is coming down the line, or if it did occur, we would implement management actions, which are the same for the previous slide I showed you, which is reducing pumping, possibly redistributing pumping, bringing other water into the system to reduce the draw on the groundwater system. I put an asterisk here because we found a mistake in the draft GSP yesterday that I wanted to mention to you. It refers to monitoring, I think it's 3 points for the land subsidence monitoring program going forward. That is not correct. We need some more points than that, including a background location. And so we'll be coordinating with LA County, who maintains the benchmarks, to add some more monitoring points to that. Just wanted to make sure your board was aware. Avoiding degraded groundwater quality. We want to maintain access to drinking water and agricultural water supplies. We also want to maintain quality consistent with current ecosystem uses. What kind of thresholds are we using? Well, we're using existing regulatory thresholds, such as for TDS, chloride, nitrate, sulfate. We're also using the Basin Salt and Nutrient Management Plan to look at overall assimilative capacity of salts in the basin. If it looks like we are trending towards exceeding the assimilative capacity, we would look at alternatives to manage that. The undesirable result is essentially degradation of water quality beyond the standards or the assimilative capacity. In the future, our measurable objective, we want to prevent water quality degradation for salts and nutrients and contaminants. Management actions are briefly listed here, but we would look at alternatives for improving groundwater quality, which may include working with affected groundwater users, possibly deploying wellhead treatment, possibly alternate water supplies, shift pumping, reduce pumping. Okay, next, moving on to depletion of interconnected surface water and GDEs. The objective here is to avoid undesirable results. And I will be quiet for a minute so your board can read this. So we want to avoid significant and unreasonable effects on beneficial uses, including groundwater dependent ecosystems, and maintain groundwater levels in such a way that surface water flow to sustain aquatic habitat where the unarmored three-spined stickleback are present. The role of groundwater pumping is key to this and understanding whether or not it's playing a factor here. And that's the same for any of these other criteria that I showed you as well. I'll digress a little bit. If with any of these criteria, it appears that we're heading towards meeting these minimum thresholds, we will be evaluating it and looking at the causes. Okay, moving on. Minimum thresholds. We don't want to see surface water depletion caused by groundwater extraction. And we'll measure that through looking at groundwater elevations in the GDE wells. Importantly, we have a special GDE evaluation process as well. And now I'm going to toggle in, well, I'm not going to toggle there yet, but shortly. I have one more slide and then we'll get into that GDE evaluation process. These are potential undesirable results. I'll take a moment for your board to read that and for stakeholders to read that. So these are potential undesirable results that we want to avoid. Permanent loss or significant degradation of existing native riparian or aquatic habitat due to pumping. And for areas such as upstream from I-5 along the Santa Clara River, there are sensitive aquatic species there. We do not want to see surface flow stopped as caused by groundwater pumping. And the measurable objective is similar to other measurable objectives, average of future water levels. Okay, moving on to the trigger concept. We've heard a lot of comments about these GDE triggers. And so the triggers are set at elevations higher than the minimum threshold. We do that because we see that the habitat has been resilient over the years, even through drought. Now, there are some stakeholders that question whether or not the triggers are appropriately set, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the big picture is that this slide reflects actions that would be taken if the GDE triggers are reached. Some have said, well, hey, you know, if they're reached, how does the GSA know that sufficient time exists to modify pumping, for example, if necessary? The GSP team has heard the comments from stakeholders, and we've been looking at this a number of different ways. In implementation of the GSP, as I mentioned earlier, the intent would not be to wait until triggers are reached to do evaluations. We're currently looking at other approaches to add more evaluation time and clarify the process for stakeholders. And we do want to return to your board and talk more about this in November. But on the slide itself, you can see there are specific actions that take place. There is a 6-step process. There would be a report created and communication to your board if the triggers are reached. Management actions might be called upon. You'll see a common theme here: redistribution of pumping, increasing imported water, conservation, outreach to private well owners. And we have down here evaluation of additional projects. If it appeared that we needed additional infrastructure or a project to manage this, we would have to evaluate that. But at the present time, we don't believe that's necessary. This is the area where the special GDE monitoring will take place. The Santa Clara River runs here from the downstream extent, of course, is on the left side of this graphic, and it goes up where it trends up to the north. That's Castaic Creek, and the river continues east. The special GDE monitoring area goes up San Francisco Canyon, and it goes even eastern in the basin. Not shown on this map are some other upland GDE monitoring areas that are included in the GSP. So if the triggers are reached, what happens? Well, we go through a process laid out here on the screen. I'll take a moment for your board to refamiliarize yourself. And again, I have an asterisk here just to remind me that we're looking at options to study the groundwater conditions ahead of the trigger being reached. And we will talk to your board more about that in November. So 1 through 6, we look at the condition, whether or not surface water flow is providing water to the habitat. We look at conditions about groundwater elevations below the tree and shrub root depths. We look at the robustness of the vegetation. We look at how frequently the trigger's been reached. We must determine if the cause in groundwater levels result from pumping. And we also will be looking at, on 6 here, if new information is obtained that can help us refine these trigger levels moving forward. There's a section in the groundwater sustainability plan that talks about data gaps and future monitoring. And this is one of these points to highlight for your board how data gaps are evaluated. The GDE monitoring that we're moving forward with has never been done before. We need to start somewhere. We need to get some holes in the ground and begin to monitor. And as we do that, we'll be connecting the dots and looking at the trigger levels and seeing if they need to be refined either up or down. But we have a great starting point at this stage. Timely management actions are important. Again, time is important to make sure that undesirable results don't occur with the GDEs. Okay, now we're switching gears a little bit from that sort of highly technical discussion on the sustainable management criteria, and we're going to move into next steps after GSP implementation. We have a number of actions that will take place after GSP implementation. Addressing data gaps is a key to the groundwater plan. We're putting in piezometers with the GDEs. We need to do elevation surveys, both with wells and also land surface elevations, such as the elevation of the creek bed near where we're doing the GDE monitoring. Sorry, I'm getting my acronyms messed up here. So data gaps are important. We also need additional water quality analyses. We would like to have that. The plan identifies that we have some data gaps with domestic well operators, not them specifically, but with the water quality from their wells. And we plan to do outreach during implementation to look for volunteers to help us collect data from private wells. The budget includes money for water quality sampling from private wells. So the GSA would not be asking private well owners to fund water quality sampling for their wells. Probably goes without saying, but I just want to throw that out there. Monitoring, reporting, outreach. Yep, new monitoring is kicking in. Ongoing evaluations of data will take place. Outreach will continue. We'll be doing special outreach for best water use practices as well. Right now, the outreach practices conducted by the local municipal entities are pretty robust, but those outreach practices don't extend directly anyway to private well owners that are not on municipal water. And so will be a plan to move forward in the future with doing outreach to private pumpers. GSP reporting. Yep, it's coming right up. Even though we expect to have the groundwater sustainability plan approved by January or end of January, the first annual report is due in April, so roughly 3 months later. That's just how it is. And so GSP reporting starts April 2022. That'll be the first annual report. 5 years after that, if not sooner, we may do an update to the groundwater sustainability plan. It just depends what we learn and how important it is that we update the plan. But typically, just as sort of a data point for your board, typically people think about GSP plan updates every 5 years, unless it needs to be done sooner. I put an asterisk here also to remind me to mention that after the first annual report is completed in April, we want to come back to your board as just part of a regular report, probably about 6 months later in October, and tell your board how we're doing on filling the data gaps and what we're learning so far. The idea is not to have, we want to communicate regularly and often on how these data gaps are being filled and what we're learning. And so we've just got a plan in mind to come back in October 2022 to tell you how this is going, if not sooner. Fiscal considerations to this implementation effort. We have costs already included in the GSP budget for implementation. You can see here, some of the costs are more than others. First year, we've got about $64,000 to fill data gaps. That largely includes wells and some increased monitoring. Additional monitoring moving forward. Best water use practices, we have some money in there for a consultant to help with outreach. And then GSP reporting, $75,000 for the first year, $50,000 for the following year. Let's talk about public comments on the draft. We received a number of letters, as shown here on your screen. Many of them came in on the 14th or 15th, right towards the end of the public comment period. I heard through the grapevine that that's a common theme with these GSPs statewide, and sure enough, our comment letters came in at the end as well. We have letters from Fish and Wildlife, Dr. Dudley, who's with University of California, Santa Barbara. We have a comment letter from a number of environmental organizations, as shown here, starting with the Nature Conservancy. We have other letters from Friends of the Santa Clara River, Scope, Roger Herring, and Stacy Fortner. We're still going through these in progressive detail, but we have certainly gone through them a fair amount already. We're not ready to prepare or release official responses to the comments because there's more work we need to do, more evaluation. So we're still reviewing in detail, but we have assembled some common themes to these comment letters that I'm going to share with your board and stakeholders. Here are the common themes. On the left-hand column is the theme, and then some keywords or key ideas are on the right-hand column. I'll pause for a moment. Okay, what I'm going to do now is take a few minutes, and you'll hear some others provide input here as well. We might hear from Jeff. Tom Bunn is going to help us with a few of these items, or a couple of these items. Tara will help us on one of these items. So we're just going to walk your board through these themes and what our take is on them at this point. So GDEs, again, a lot of comments on that. A number of comments were about the trigger. Is the trigger too high? Is it too low? Some people feel it's set too low. Some people ask, hey, you know, you're setting it there. How do you know you have enough time to react and adapt if needed? We feel like we're on the right track with this trigger concept, but we do want to detail this out more for your board. So it's a fair comment about triggers and how quickly the basin can respond to management actions if there's a concern that undesirable results are anticipated. There are comments about including more GDEs in the upland areas into the plan. There's also comments about Savannah Oaks over by Stevenson Ranch. We're looking at these comments. There was a comment about historical conditions. Let me take a step back. The draft groundwater sustainability plan looks at the basin as a whole, looks at the river system. It considers historical water levels, habitat, and what we see historically looking at water levels and aerial photos is that the habitat along the river system, the greenness, for example, it waxes and wanes some, but it's been steady over history. Some people, though, think that's not the case. And so we're going to look at that a little bit more and bring perhaps another line of evidence to this. We have begun looking at EVI data. It's a vegetative index that is computed through satellite analyses. We're looking at that to evaluate other lines of reasonings for historical conditions in the valley. There was a comment from Fish and Wildlife about water reclamation plant flows. We need to look at that. There is a mention in the draft GSP that reduction of water reclamation flows could lead to an undesirable result, but it doesn't look like we connected the dots further in the document. So we're evaluating that further. Climate change models. We've gotten two families of comments on this. One commenter said we should also use the extreme wet and dry models in the climate change analysis. Another commenter said you should just use the dry model or the most dry model in the future. We've utilized the climate models provided by the Department of Water Resources in the analysis. We used a fairly average future dry model as opposed to the most extreme dry model because we didn't think that one was reasonable. But we'll look at this a little bit more. But we think we're on the right track with the models that we use. And with GSP monitoring and reporting, if it appears after implementation that we need to look at different models, we can do that then. So we're reviewing this one in more detail. We've had comments on domestic wells, wanting to know more about their depths and volumes of extraction. That information is available at a high level from the Department of Water Resources. It provides average depths for wells in particular areas. We do have extraction estimates in the flow model, so we'll pull those out. Other questions are about water quality, and they're of two types. One, do you have a plan to monitor water quality from domestic wells? We do. I mentioned it earlier. We do want to do outreach in the future and look for volunteers from private well owners to open their wells up for monitoring water quality. We had another comment saying that the water quality in private wells has been degraded over the years. And so that's something we'll look at as well. It's a data gap. It's something that we need to fill. Monitoring wells, we had a question about well condition. And the question is, and I'm going to paraphrase here, hey, you've got these monitoring wells. What are you going to do if it doesn't work properly? And we will add additional text into the GSP for that. But the bottom line is we'll be monitoring wells. We'll be preparing these annual reports. If we have wells that aren't working well, then that will be made note of in the annual report, and we'll move forward with either trying to repair the well or install a new well. It might also be in the annual reporting over the next couple of years, we realize we need to install more wells. And so we've got to begin the process and begin collecting data before we get there. Subsidence. We've had a couple comments that indicated there's some confusion on subsidence. And this is something that the technical team worked really hard on, but there was confusion in one of the letters, and I recall at the recent workshop, there was some confusion. And I just wanted to take a minute and talk to your board and stakeholders about this. Some of the questions are, was there a past coordinated monitoring program for subsidence in the valley? No, there wasn't. That's not surprising. Subsidence in general isn't monitored carefully statewide, except for the Central Valley. There's a lot of subsidence monitoring efforts there. Despite that, though, the technical team really did a lot of digging, looking for data on land surface elevations that could be used to analyze subsidence. We did find data from Los Angeles County's benchmark elevation program, which is very interesting. It goes back to the late 70s. Data is collected every 5, 6, 7 years, depending. We went and we did a time series analysis of all that data basin-wide. What did we find? We didn't see any clear evidence of subsidence. What we did see are small changes in ground surface elevations on the order of, ballparks here, average of thousands of feet per year, pretty small. We know that this basin is tectonically active. There are active faults in the basin, according to the state. And so, though we don't see evidence of subsidence caused by groundwater extraction, we don't believe the basin is highly susceptible to subsidence, we do want to monitor it moving forward. There will be periods in the future where groundwater levels are lower than historically, and so the plan includes an approach to monitor and analyze that moving forward. Arundo removal, the letter from Dr. Come on, Rick. The doctor from Dudley from UCSB supported Arundo removal and that the GSP partner with groups doing Arundo removal. We do have in the draft GSP, partnering is something that we would encourage. I'm going to turn these next couple rows over to Tom Bunn on the public trust and human right to water. And then after that, Tara will go into outreach to disadvantaged communities. So with that, Tom, take it away.
Okay. Sigma and the Sigma regulations don't mention the public trust at all. There was a 2018 court case that decided that the duty to protect public trust resources continued despite the enactment of Sigma, that these were kind of parallel paths. Public trust resources, for those not familiar, are navigation, commerce, fisheries, and what I'm going to call the public's right to use and enjoyment of navigable streams. That's a very broad category that includes all kinds of uses and all kinds of values, environmental values, cultural values, aesthetic values. And that's protected by the public trust. Another issue in that same case, and I realize I'm giving a lot of background here, but we haven't gone through this before, which is why I'm doing it now. Another aspect of that same case, the county in that case claimed that the public trust didn't apply to groundwater. It's all about navigable waterways. And the court said, well, yeah, that's right. It doesn't apply strictly to groundwater, but the public trust doctrine applies if extraction of groundwater adversely impacts a navigable waterway. Well, you hear that quote, and that sounds a lot like what Sigma requires with its effects of groundwater pumping on interconnected stream. Let me read the quote from the court again. The public trust doctrine applies if extraction of groundwater adversely impacts a navigable waterway. So in fact, Sigma is a little bit broader because it's not limited to navigable waterways. It applies to all interconnected streams. But I view Sigma and the public trust doctrine as compatible with each other. There are some wording differences between what some of the courts have said and what the Sigma statute says. For example, the Sigma statute requires you to identify significant and unreasonable impacts. The public trust doctrine may not require an impact to be unreasonable. It says you have to take action if feasible. Is there a difference between those two concepts? We don't know at this point. I guess the court will tell us in the future. But that's why this chart shows public trust with interconnected streams, because it all depends on the impact of the pumping on the waterways. And so we're treating it as part of our response to the comments. There will be incorporate our response to interconnected streams and to GDEs. The human right to water is a statute that was recently enacted. It's not mentioned in Sigma either, although it is mentioned in the regulations that it's something that the Department of Water Resources has to use as a general principle in evaluating groundwater sustainability plans. Human rights to water are closely connected to disadvantaged communities. And it's usually used in terms of drinking water, especially drinking water from domestic wells. You'll notice that the comment ideas here for human rights to water are the same as we have for domestic wells, and we're going to treat them similarly. And so I guess that's all I have to say about that. Back to you, Mr. Veerkowitz, except you're not back at your desk. There you are.
Here. I was just out of camera. Thank you, Mr. Bond. All right. Tara, would you please handle the next one?
Absolutely. So we received some feedback on the disadvantaged communities outreach. Within the initial communication engagement plan, we decided, because most of the disadvantaged communities were within municipal water service, and due to the kind of ongoing COVID piece, putting things out in those public places that we had initially discussed wouldn't make sense. So we relied on engaging with them through the disadvantaged community involvement program, and reached out in that fashion. However, there is always more that we can do. And so we'd love to basically do those things now that things have started to open back up, and put handouts in public places like libraries and in other local businesses to ensure that people are aware of what's happening and to encourage their feedback as well.
Great. Thanks, Tara. Okay, we are almost at the end of the slides. I want to talk a little bit about timing. So our earlier schedule approach anticipated moving from today's meeting to a December 15th special meeting for board adoption. And while we're not there yet, there is an item on today's agenda to consider that December 15th meeting. However, we're now suggesting a special board meeting in November to discuss these comments and responses and potential modifications to the GSP. That will likely delay completion of the final draft GSP. That's okay. We still have plenty of time in the schedule, and it's important to make sure these issues are addressed well. So that will likely push your board's consideration of the final GSP into early January 2022. And I just wanted your board to be aware of that. And the last slide, we would like to hear comments from your board. We understand that you may have a lot of questions and comments, and we also would like to meet in November to further consider public input. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, President Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. Virgutz. That was very comprehensive for a summary, very comprehensive summary, both not just from you, but also from Councillor Bunn and also from Ms. Bravo. What I'd like to do now is open it up for public comment. Ms. Kang, do we have anyone signed up for public comment on this item?
There appears to be no public comment at this time.
All right, then I will turn to my fellow directors. I see Vice President Goodside has her hand up, so we'll start with you.
Thank you. Just a couple comments. And I attended the outreach meeting, I guess the one in September that Tara was referring to. I have one very specific one and then some general ones. So the specific one, which happened the exact same way at the stakeholder outreach meeting. When we were on slide 25, Mr. Virgut said there was some indication of thousands of feet per year of subsidence, and that was not a big deal, or at least that's what I heard. And that also happened at the public meeting. And then basically after comments, it was clear that that was not in our area. Did we have thousands of feet a year of subsidence in our area? Yes or no?
And Mr. Virgutz, if perhaps you could explain, was it thousands ANDS of feet or thousandths DTHS?
Yeah, thank you.
Because
That's the
I
same.
thought he probably means thousandths.
Yeah,
So-
and it's the exact same thing that happened at the meeting and everybody freaked out immediately.
Oh my goodness. I am so thankful you brought that up, Director Goodside. Yes, it's thousandths.
Okay, so
ETHS.
a multitude of 1/1000th of a foot, not thousands of feet.
Right. We're
Okay.
seeing since the late 70s, land surfaces moving on the thousandths of feet per year,
Okay.
up or down. So it's very small.
Okay. And then that jumps into actually my more general observations on this. I've had the opportunity or not opportunity to be driving all over Los Angeles lately, listening to podcasts. And the theme for this week was how much the media is negative and how everybody likes to glom on to the negative or, their assumed causes. And so we have a huge amount of technical detail in here. Even in the executive summary, you have to read it very carefully to pull out what is going on. And it is a technical document, so it is what it is. But I would like to see, as we're doing, it sounds like we're doing some more tweaks, more clarity that the valley at present is not showing any undesirable effects. That is the first place I noticed it in the executive summary is on page ES 13. So 13 pages into the summary, in the middle of a paragraph, it said there's no current undesirable results. The comments I hear in the community, people stop me walking my dog. How can we, build more houses? How can we survive this drought? Valid concerns, but we are here to educate them that we are doing okay, is what I read in the plan, that we're doing okay. And we have a plan to make sure we're doing okay. Even the website for the GSA, it's the last sentence says, the overall goal is to achieve sustainable groundwater management within 20 years. If somebody looked at the valley today, the experts, I'm hearing that we are managing it sustainably. So rather than the goal is to achieve it within 20 years, same goal that applies to the Central Valley, who's literally dropping hundreds of feet in subsidence. They have that goal that they hope to get there in 20 years. We're there and we want to maintain it. So I would like us to use this as a, educational tool that, hey, we've done okay. Here's all this technical data. We want to make sure that we stay okay. And that's a little different tone. And again, people are going to hear the negative because, people are running around like, oh my God, we're drought. What are we going to do? There are solutions. We are implementing them and, double checks and things like that. And so we can tell a positive story. We don't need to be ambiguous and have it taken as negative. There's things in there about the water budgets, and it appears we're going to be okay for full build out, even with current projections on climate change. I am not sure that people reading this are hearing that. And so I would just want to make sure that where we have data that comes to a conclusion, that we talk about it and not bury it in the plan. Lastly, and related to, I forgot one specific question. You probably like the specific questions better. One specific and one last general. Why all of a sudden are we seeing comments about the water reclamation plan? I don't remember hearing that in the other public hearings. Is that just an add-on? Has there been additional focus on the water reclamation plant discharge? We didn't talk a lot about that before.
Right.
So, and why is that coming up now?
The Department of Fish and Wildlife's comment letter on the draft GSP made a reference to that. And so that's where that comes from, Director.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that. And when you mentioned it, I was thinking, as we had to at SCV Water, draw a line of what we control and what is going on. And there are recycled water projects and other things that can affect what we're doing. So it makes sense. I just didn't remember hearing it before. And then lastly, podcast topic again, that we have these trigger points that were set up by a technical team, much discussion, much public stakeholder discussion. I assume the state probably had some input on what they want to see on trigger points. Now I'm hearing that we're talking about a pre-trigger trigger. I would like us to pick a good trigger point and use that, not cast doubt on our own trigger points by having pre-trigger triggers. It's either a good trigger point or it's not, or we need more time or something. But in generality, we need to use the data we have and make a decision, not have everything be like, well, here's our plan, but we're not really sure. So we're going to check our plan. We're not sure our checks are good. So we're going to check our checks. We've talked before that this is subject to revision. If we see trends, it will be updated. I just want to be careful about pre-triggered triggers and how we answer that so it doesn't cast doubt on our best engineering estimate at the time. So that's it for my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President.
Thank you, Vice President Goodsight. Director Cooper?
Yes, thank you, President Natoli. I don't know that I can improve on what Director Goodside had to say, because that's exactly how I read the report as well. And the plan is that we're in very good shape. We've stayed in good shape for many years. And this is just identifying those things that we can do in the future to continue to stay that way. And I'm really happy with the report. I think they did a great job. A couple of quick questions on it. One is for Rick. In the GDE triggers, it talks about a 3-year average. So if the first year you drop below the trigger, you don't do anything, is that Rick, until you've kind of hit 3 years of below it, or how does that work?
The triggers, maybe the report isn't super clear here. Jeff, can you help respond to Mr. Director Cooper? I think I know the answer, but why don't you take a shot at it?
Sure thing. I'd be happy to. And if we do have some confusion in the text, we'll make sure that we fix it.
Mhm.
So
Hi,
the
Jeff.
triggers refer specifically to the GDE wells. They are not the same as minimum thresholds. Triggers are just to allow us to say, we're starting to approach some lower water levels that could impact GDEs. And so we want to start this evaluation process. And we want to make a decision about what we're going to do to make sure that we don't impact GDEs. And that's what we mean by trigger levels. And there's only going to be one trigger level at each of these locations. The minimum thresholds, on the other hand, for changes in water levels over time, those apply to chronic decline in water levels that we would observe over multiple years. And so the idea being, if we drop below the minimum threshold just in one well in 1 year, that isn't enough to signal an undesirable result. If we see that drop in water level below the minimum threshold in wells over multiple consecutive years, multiple wells for consecutive years, that is defined as an undesirable result, and we spell that out. So I think we said it's got to be for alluvial aquifer, 20% of the wells over 3 years, something like that. And that's what we've defined as undesirable. But for the triggers, it's on a per well GDE basis. It's not over multiple years. If we hit that trigger at that location in 1 year, that's a concern.
Oh,
we don't want to let it go.
Thank you. That clarifies that quite well. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
And this question is for Mr. Bunn. Tom, I mean, this isn't a CEQA document like some of the others that we do. And is this document, when we complete it and adopt it, is it challengeable?
It's not subject.
Yes, it is, but the principal thing that we're concerned with originally is its review for sufficiency by the Department of Water Resources. And that's where our attention is, well, obviously our attention, if somebody sues us, is to be to the lawsuit. But initially, the Department of Water Resources is going to take a look at it and whether it's sufficient. And if not, then that sets a whole other set of procedures into play.
Okay, so, and that's by each chapter that they develop that, whether it's sufficient or not, is that correct?
Not exactly clear how they're going to do it. They haven't released any evaluations of plans yet, even though the first ones were filed 2 years ago. So I don't know if they're going to do it on a chapter by chapter basis or just by identifying what they see as deficiencies or what.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
They have sent out some preliminary letters that don't go through the entire plan. They focus on what they see is a problem area. And that's typically where a plan didn't adequately address a comment. And that's one reason that we're taking comments so seriously.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And back to you, President Tully.
Thank you, Director Cooper. Director Martin?
There, had to unmute my, thank you, President Natoli. I want to make some observations and comments that basically tie into what Director Goodsite and Director Cooper have already said. And I think the conclusion that I think Director Goodsite would like to have a little more visibility on in the report didn't happen by itself. We have not just started groundwater basin management with the passage of the act. We've been doing it for a long time, but it certainly appears to me that this plan, thanks to the efforts of the team, is a much more comprehensive groundwater management tool than we've ever had before. And so I appreciate the work that's gone in. We're going to incorporate some of the more current methodologies and criteria going forward. And I think it could do nothing more than help in our groundwater management efforts going forward. But I do want to make the point that this is just a step up from what has already been going on for many years in our valley, thanks to the GSA and to the GSA team. And perhaps if Rick and Mr. Barry could maybe comment, I'm sure they're familiar with groundwater management that had gone before this plan, and maybe comment as to the my observation that it is a superior groundwater basin management tool, even though what we've done before has been quite effective. I'd like to kind of hear that, but I also want to thank the team for all the effort to put this plan together. And that would be my comment, my question. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Virgutz and Mr. Berry.
Thank you, President Tolley. Director Martin, you're absolutely right. The basin has been managed sustainably even before the groundwater sustainability plan requirements came along. But these new plan requirements are a step up. We've conducted new studies. We are monitoring and measuring the basin health in a way that we haven't done before. That's new. And it's going to allow us to ensure that we maintain sustainability moving forward. And like you mentioned with the new studies, gosh, there are a ton of new studies that we did just because of this legislation. And they've allowed us to really understand the basin better, which allows us to make sure the basin is managed even better moving forward. And Jeff, I don't know, you may have something else to add.
Yeah, I think that was well stated, and thank you, Director Martin, for your comments and others. From my perspective, having taken part in some previous studies and management actions, they've all been a bit piecemeal for certain regulatory purposes. The monitoring has been a little bit piecemeal, and this was the first time where all of that information was compiled in one place. And DWR, to their credit, I believe, set up a program that basically requires us to look at all of the elements together, subsidence. We never looked at that before, but now we have to, in conjunction with sustainability for pumping. Same thing with the GDE issues and the interconnected surface water, protecting and avoiding impacts there. Likewise, water quality, and to the extent that that can be impacted by pumping. So all of these indicators that we're required to look at, yeah, it was difficult to integrate all that, but that was really the most significant difference in looking at all those key indicators of sustainability in one place. So thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Mr. Virgutz, anything else to add?
Nothing from me.
I don't see any other hands raised. So I do have a few questions based on the packet and the presentation today. On the chronic lowering of water levels over a 3-year period in certain wells, have we determined which wells would be the certain wells that are monitored for this criterion?
The answer is yes. And it applies to any of the wells that have that water level drop below the minimum threshold. So if any of the wells show they're below the minimum thresholds 3 years in a row, that's a concern. And as Jeff mentioned, the threshold is set up to reflect, Jeff, I think it's 25% of the wells would represent an undesirable result.
Right. And one clarification, we were required out of the full group of monitoring wells that have been monitored and will continue to be monitored. We have selected a subset of what we call representative wells.
Yeah, good point.
Because we understand their construction, we know which aquifer they're in, they have a long history of water level and other data for those locations, and they have good spatial coverage. And so those representative wells are where we establish these sustainable management criteria. And it will be at those specific wells where we're going to be honing in on how we're doing with sustainability.
Very good, thank you. And I was also wondering, why are we only sustaining surface flow for aquatic habitat where the unarmored three-spine stickleback are present? Are there other flora or fauna that we should also be concerned about?
The reason that we have that criteria for the unarmored three-spine stickleback is because they are a protected species that is fragile. And so we want to make sure that the stretch of the river that they exist in stays wet so they can continue. And so that's why. Yes, there are other areas of habitat that are important, but they're not as highly sensitive.
And then another question, I was wondering, who will be the group or the person to determine things like if the historic low groundwater level is already below a tree or shrub root depths, and if vegetation or fauna will survive the temporary loss of groundwater or interconnected surface waters? Who will make that decision?
Great question. We will have a biologist working with the technical team to make sure they have the right elevations dialed in, and there will be a coordination in those efforts.
And where will the biologist come from? Do you know that yet?
We will bring a biologist on board, but we have not selected one. It would be through consultant services.
Okay, thank you. I am concerned, as I'm sure the other directors are, about the data gaps, and I was very glad to hear that you'll be updating us with the annual report and also the interim, I guess that'd be a semi-annual report in October on things like the data gap. I think that information is very important. I didn't have any other questions for you. I just wanted to clarify the schedule that you're proposing moving forward. So are you proposing no December meeting, but a meeting in November to really drill down on the interconnected surface waters and the groundwater dependent ecosystem issues? No meeting in December, and then a meeting in January where we would consider the final GSP. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, you did, President Natoli.
All right. Okay, very good. Thank you. So today we'd be looking at adjourning until sometime in November. And I'm just trying to get an idea of that when we move to that part of the agenda. Okay, I do see another hand up, Dr. Atkins. Let's go to you.
Thank you, President Natoli. I appreciate the fact that the GSP doesn't call out any undesirable impacts. However, one tributary to the Santa Clara River, Bouquet Creek, suffers from those symptoms, even though it doesn't qualify as defined in undesirable impacts. In other words, the groundwater sustainability is in jeopardy, not by virtue of well pumping, but by virtue of lack of recharge for a number of different reasons. And that I've brought it up before. I don't know what we can do about it. Is there going to be any mention in the GSP about the Bouquet Creek quandary?
Mr. Viergoets?
I'm thinking about that, Director Atkins. Bouquet Creek.
As you think, let me ask. do you think at some point, and this is for Mr. Barry as well, cogitate on that for a second while I present this one as well, this question as well. Do you think that Sigma will be expanded at some point in the future to bring in any particular drainage which is in distress? That's, I don't know that that you know the answer, but I'd like at some point to have an understanding of where the state's head is at and where we're going. But more specifically, are we going to mention that Bouquet Creek quandary in the GSP? Is it, I mean, if it weren't for the criteria and the specific reasons, it matches the symptoms of an undesirable impact. And it's unsettling that we can do nothing.
Okay. Jeff, did you want to describe what you're thinking?
Yeah, so, yes, there are significant concerns going on up in Bouquet Canyon, as well as in some of the upper watersheds. And, our focus to be compliant with Sigma and the GSP guidance was to focus on the areas that are connected to our principal aquifers, the Saugus or the alluvium, and also could be affected by pumping, since pumping is what we can manage in the basin. Unfortunately, Sigma doesn't specifically say the GSA should also address drought and less recharge, which is probably one of the bigger issues in all these upper trib areas. They just drain out. That does not to say, though, that the GSA couldn't decide that it wants to have a project or a program or address some drought-driven issues if it chooses to. What we presented in the GSP is really more focused on what's required by DWR. To comment on your last question about will Sigma be expanded? I'm hopeful that it'll be refined, that there'll be improvements in the way in which they're asking for information. This was such a huge lift and much more expensive than most basins could handle, quite honestly. And I think there'll be resistance to a lot more expectations in many basins. I also think that the state's going to be really having trouble with helping adjoining GSP or GSAs and downstream GSAs get along and come up with some solution for sustainability, for example, in the Central Valley, with all those GSAs and GSPs that are not very well coordinated. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of effort to try to work those out if they already haven't gone to the courts. So I think that the department's going to be very distracted by what's going on in the Central Valley, to be honest with you, before they would go forward with more requirements or change requirements or expanded requirements.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you for your input.
Yeah.
Thank you, folks. I ask for your indulgence. I actually did have a couple of other issues from the materials in the packet that I wanted to ask about. We talk about some management actions that the GSA may undertake if undesirable results are anticipated. And I'm wondering, when it comes to things like releases of water from Castaic Lake, import banked water or state water project water, tiered water conservation. I don't know if this is a question for Mr. Viergoots or Councillor Bunn. How much authority does the GSA have to get water from Castaic Lake or import banked water from the state water project, et cetera, et cetera? How can we just say, yes, flip the switch, or is that outside of our purview as a GSA?
From my point of view, it's not clear to me whether we have the power to directly import water, let's say from the state water project. Well, in fact, we don't. We're not a state water project contractor. So for that reason, we can't. We do have the ability to negotiate with other entities, however, in particular SCV Water, which does have that power. And I think that most of the management actions of the plan contemplate the work actually being done by SCV Water.
I understand that. I'm still a little hesitant when we don't have direct control over certain issues. I hope we don't run into any conflicts in the future. And another question I had from the materials, we're allowing the temporary loss of vegetation, but I'm wondering, when does temporary become permanent? And would that be our biologist who decides that? I guess would be a question for you, Mr. Viergoots.
It's an interesting question. I think the biologist would certainly be involved in that. And we would also be looking, assuming it was a loss, a temporary loss due to lowered water levels, we would be looking for habitat to recover when water levels came up. So
I would add to that, just to support what you're saying, Rick, that a lot of that depends on the species of what we're talking about. Whereas, willows and some of the other species in the riparian area, and I'm not a biologist, but having studied these things, some are more resilient than others. Some of the tree species might not be as resilient. I know we have Tom Barnes on the line. If Tom, if you would like to speak to this. I don't know if he needs to be unmuted.
He does have his hand up. Ms. Kang, do you need to unmute him?
Could we get everybody's picture back up since the presentation is done? There we go. Thank you.
Mr. Barnes, you
Yes.
are able to speak whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks. Okay, I was in the audience. But thank you for including me and allowing me to input a very good discussion that's been happening today. Thanks for the discussion. The interest in the questions of how groundwater levels at any given time may affect resources is a thoughtful process in the GSP. We put together a series of questions that have some flexibility to them. That gives the agency and the staff the ability to evaluate data at individual locations that really are different, have different types of ecosystems, and may have different types of solutions. If there is, for instance, a biological signal of a water stress occurring on the very outer edges of a riparian corridor, just in some willows, but the rest of the and it's the month of October, and the winter is coming. That's a thoughtful understanding about what to do in terms of a management action, as opposed to data coming in April suggesting that a segment of the river is entirely dry and is in crisis. That thoughtful evaluation that is put into these questions, so that and then there's a requirement to write a report that is given to this board to look at, to tell the story and the narrative of and what location along the river something is occurring that the staff feels needs attention or doesn't. And then the explanation as to why the data suggests that no management actions are needed at this point, but certainly more, continued care and attention as the months progress. I really appreciate the comments about the overall health of the corridor and the system to date, the lack of undesirable results that the report is suggesting, and that this GSP is written accordingly to maintain that over a long period of time and evaluate temporary effects and prevent, certainly, permanent effects of reduced acreage or reduced health. So maybe I hope that provides a little bit of a characterization of what we tried to do in the process.
Yes, Mr. Barnes, thank you. Did you have anything to add, Mr. Viergoots?
no, President Natoli.
All right, very well. Let me check one more time for any more hands raised. Seeing none, I'm going to thank everybody for this very thoughtful discussion on the draft GSP. I think we covered a lot of good points and there's still more to come. We're moving on now to item 5.3. Again, Mr. Birgit, you are at the dais.
Thank you, Director Natoli. Question. Well, allow me to move on to item 5.3. You will be glad to know that I do not have a PowerPoint. This is a relatively short written report, and it goes into the usual things that we talk with your board about, where we're making progress, the 6-month look ahead, a couple highlights, the reimbursements from grants have been authorized, just proud of $900,000. We are moving forward with getting GDE monitoring wells installed in the basin. And we look forward to coming back to your board in the future and moving this GSP forward. And that's all I have. Certainly I can expand, but we've covered a lot of ground. And
Yeah, yes, we have. Secretary Kang, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not have any public comment.
And do we have any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we're moving on to item 5.4. Again, in the hot seat, Mr. Viergoots. This is a formalizing the schedule that we've discussed today for moving forward.
thank you. So with 5.4, I think the right thing to do with item 5.4 is to essentially disregard it for today. We're not looking at setting a December 15th meeting. And so we're not seeking action from your board to schedule a December 15th meeting.
No, but what we could do is revise this to include our proposed meeting in November and in January. So perhaps we could do that on this item. Is that acceptable, Mr. Bunn?
Am I muted? No, I believe that is acceptable.
Okay,
Yes.
great.
Very good. Then why don't we
Great.
use item 5.4 to do setting the schedule, where the recommendation would be we set a special board meeting for a date in November. What would work for staff? And then we'll have to see if that works for the board.
Understood.
I understand I'm putting you on the spot or not.
No, it's not that. It's all about the electronic calendars these days. So let me open it up.
Some of us still use.
Hang on.
Or both. I use them both.
I may suggest that Ms. Kang could poll the committee or the board, sorry, afterwards. And as long as we have consensus that the board is comfortable holding a meeting in November and January. And that way, I think it's going to be really difficult to get everybody's schedules together on the fly. But that would be my suggestion, but happy to do it any way the board would appreciate.
Mr. Cole, I think that probably makes sense to do. We just need to be, and I have no doubt in my mind, Secretary Kang would pay attention to Thursday, the 11th being Veterans Day. And then of course, the Thanksgiving holiday at the end of the month. Do I have consensus from, well, let's vote on that. why don't we go ahead and have a motion to cancel the proposed December meeting, and I guess I'm making a motion. I move that we do not consider December 15th as a date for a special meeting of the Board of Directors, that we consider a meeting in November, and then final GSP meeting in December, and that we ask the secretary to poll the board on available dates for a November meeting.
I'll second your motion, Director Natoli.
Thank you, Director Cooper. Discussion, any public comment on that?
There is no public comment, but there are 2 hand raises from Director Cooper and Vice President Goodside.
Yes, thank you. Director Cooper?
Nope, I just put it down.
Director Goodside, Vice President Goodside, please.
I know Mr. Vergut said that we are okay with doing it in January. What is our drop dead date? Where we have to adopt it, and how does that relate to any of the other agencies that are there other votes that need to happen before we vote, or is this? So what's the drop dead date, and are we pushing it by going into January?
The drop dead date is end of January. So addressing it early January gives us, we still have some cushion there.
If I could clarify, Mr. Virgutz, it's January 31st, correct?
Thank you.
Not just the end, because some people may consider the 20th the end of January, but it's actually January 31st, correct?
Yes, President Natoli, thank you.
And all we need to do is electronically transmit it, is that correct?
Rick, I can answer that. There's a bit of a process to upload all the information to DWR, and we're asking for 2 weeks to be able to do that.
Okay.
Comfortably.
So perhaps we're looking at no later than the second week of January, because if we're directing any changes, some changes would need to be made before Mr. Berry can finalize the document that would be transmitted. So very, very early in January is what I'm hearing.
Yep.
Yes.
Vice President Goodside, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I'll just mention that much like we have Thanksgiving holidays, if we're early in January, we might lose people. So we're going to have to, sounds like we have to be on the ball and get this done. And so I appreciate Uni working to schedule it so we have a quorum and we can finalize it.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. No further discussion. Secretary Kang, would you call the roll call?
Can you restate the motion, please? I'm sorry.
Yes, the motion, and I won't spend as much time trying to make it pretty as I did the first time. No meeting in December, a meeting in November, and then final GSP to be considered in early January.
Thank you.
And the secretary will poll us for a date in November. All right, Secretary Kang, I believe you can move forward with a roll call vote.
Thank you. Director Atkins, your vote?
Yes.
Director Bryden, your vote?
Yes.
Director Cooper, your vote?
Yes.
Director Gibbs, your vote?
Yes.
Director Martin, your vote?
Yes.
Vice President Goodside, your vote?
Yes.
President Natoli, your vote?
Aye.
Thank you. I will close the vote of the directors for November and January special board meeting.
Great, thank you very much. All right, item 5.5. Mr. Virgutz, a status update on Bouquet Canyon Creek.
Thank you, President Natoli. I have a brief PowerPoint on this today. Hang on. I'll tell you, I love being able to do these meetings remotely, but sometimes at the same time, I don't love it so much. Okay.
I think we all could agree with you on that.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for that delay.
No problem.
Okay, can you see the opening slide?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, so just have a brief update. It's a status update on Bouquet Canyon Creek. And I will go into it here and we'll move right through it. Oops. Okay. So we've provided updates in the past to your board. The last update was a year ago, and we talked about the history of Bouquet Canyon, the dam, the creek, the administrative constraints on water releases, and your board provided direction to raise this issue to SCV Water's Board of Directors for additional discussion. A meeting was held with their board in January 2021. Quick review. This is a map of the area. Bouquet Reservoir is on the northeastern portion. The creek is highlighted in that bluish color. I would love it if there was that much water in the creek right now, but the creek is not flowing very strong these days. And there are some impacted wells downstream from the reservoir, shown in that yellowish color. Due to concerns with road fitness, road safety, there are road closures from time to time in the canyon due to water moving across the road from the creek due to reductions in the ability for the river to carry the water. And those reductions in the river's ability translate to reductions in discharges from the reservoir. Recently, Director Atkins, working on behalf of SCV Water, and also Director Gibbs on behalf of the city, helped arrange a field meeting with a Bouquet Canyon resident that had some very interesting ideas about restoration.
Forgive me, Mr. Vergoots. I was representing myself personally. I wasn't representing SCV Water.
Thank you, Director Atkins. We had an interesting field meeting. We looked at key concerns in the canyon. Public safety is one of them. The road closures, the concern about water moving off the road, and frankly, the concern about traffic accidents. Water recharge is also an important consideration. We learned that a number of well owners in the basin are now trucking water in. We know that the loss of groundwater recharge certainly affected Lark Ranch, but of course it's affecting other well owners as well in the area. There are well owners importing water. And then there's also a lot of concerns with the creek being degraded. Invasive species have moved in, there's overgrowth, trash. These things reduce the quality of the habitat, they reduce the amount of water that can move through the creek, and that has a combined effect on the overall health and how much water can be recharged. I'm going to show you some photographs. Here is a picture of the creek with an invasive species known as yellow iris. You will see in the center bottom of this picture, there are a number of green plants with sort of long, slender leaves that are coming up from what looks like the ground surface here. Those have sort of choked off the creek a little bit. The creek is there, but it's flow is inhibited by these invasive species. The local resident that we talked with described approaches that have been taken on the parcel scale to remove this iris. This is a picture of the iris. It's something that can be removed by hand. It's not something that is deeply rooted like Arundo. This is something that can be plucked out. And here's a picture of what the creek looks like when the yellow iris is removed by hand. So it looks terrific. In this picture, the yellow iris has been removed. The water is moving through here. You may be able to see the base of the creek in this picture. There are sands and gravels in there that are being rejuvenated. So there are local parcel scale things that can be done relatively easily to improve the habitat in front of the residences. There are concerns with overgrowth, though, up and down the canyon. This is an area where the creek is completely obscured by yellow iris and other plants. Downstream, there are areas of the creek that have trash and debris dumped in them, overgrowth from trees and other impediments that are causing the creek to not work right. It's clogging up, it's not draining well, it's not working like a natural creek. Bouquet Canyon Road, water will flow. It will flow from the creek, build up water pressure or build up the water level and seep across the road. And this can create big concerns for traffic safety. For those of you that know the canyon, you know that it is a main thoroughfare for people to get, say, from Leona Valley to Santa Clarita back and forth, or the Antelope Valley. And some people move pretty quickly through this canyon road. Key points from the field meeting: there are a number of relatively simple solutions that can be done to the existing creek to restore the habitat. We showed you some pictures of just simply removing the iris by hand. Trash removal can largely be done by hand. Removing some of these blockages would need to be done with chainsaws and a work crew to get the fallen trees out and clean out the overgrowth. So what's nice about this is these are all relatively simple efforts that could be used to restore a portion of the stream flow and habitat in the grade. Like any restoration work, it would need to be maintained going forward. So we conducted follow-up after the field meeting. We did look at AB 353 again, the bill from Lackey that allows for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to issue incidental take permits for Bouquet Creek restoration. It's an interesting bill. It's specific just to Bouquet Creek to help with this restoration. One of the things that's required with the take permit is that a habitat restoration plan be included. We are continuing to collaborate with LA County on the efforts that it is undertaking, its interim solution to help restore stream flows in the area and reduce flooding. We are also reaching out to resource agencies to collaborate on potential projects to pursue grant funding to help with this restoration. And that is all I have, President Natoli, and thank you for your time.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Viergoots. Secretary Kang, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do have public comment.
All right,
Give me
please.
one moment, please.
Yes.
Ms. Planback?
Hi, Lynn Planbeck is a member of Santa Clarita Organization for Planning and the Environment, a longtime member of the community. And have observed problems in Bouquet Creek for many years, there are issues that are missing out of these reports, and it really concerns me. Part of 353 established a task force which involved the county and the wildlife agencies. There was supposed to be a large restoration project at one of the picnic areas that has since not been used, that would reestablish the stickleback in the area. And that's never discussed in any of these reports. No updates on that. Another issue that has not been discussed is the fact that there are around 3,000 private wells in Bouquet Creek in the middle of the creek. They don't have permits to be there. They are all taking their individual wells, so it's a small amount, maybe 1 acre foot to 10 acre feet. But when you add that up, that's a large sum. And I think that if we as an agency are suddenly putting our foot into this project that's been ongoing and tried to be resolved over many years, it needs to be a complete report. It needs to be an accurate report of what this coalition of agencies and environmental organizations are doing in that area. And there needs to be some discussion of these illegal water wells that are in the middle of the creek without permits. They're diverting. Part of the reason that the water has gone down is because of all these wells. So I would just ask in the future that those issues be included. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Plambeck.
We do have one more public comment.
Yes.
Ms. Cattell, whenever you're ready. Ms. Cattell?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes.
can hear you now.
Thank you. Sandra Cattell, and I'm representing the Sierra Club. Thank you for bringing up Bouquet Creek. It's been an area that we have watched very, very carefully over the years. We actually worked on the bill that you're talking about to help restore the area. Like to mention that we would like to finally see this done. The Sierra Club is also available to help in any way that we can with helping to further this product, this restoration. We're also interested in helping with removal of any invasive species. We would be happy to help put together teams, especially if it's a really not very difficult thing to remove, like the yellow iris. I'd also like to mention, though, when we're talking about groundwater sustainability, the city has just recently put in, okayed a housing project in an area right at the county line, right next to the probation camps, which is an area that historically has been a riparian area and has been kind of a settling pond for the area. Actually, as Bob Keller had once mentioned, it used to be a bog. So we're actually taking away some of the areas of recharge. And we need to protect those recharge areas alongside this creek. And as Ms. Plambeck mentioned, stop anyone from taking water from an illegal well in the creek. And we also need to help restore the full flow from Bouquet Reservoir to the residents so that they do not have to truck in water. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Cattell. Hopefully those are issues that could be addressed in the habitat restoration plan. I don't see any other public comment. We have a couple of comments from members of the board. First, Vice President Goodside.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Director Atkins and Director Gibbs for doing some of the field work on this and getting staff out to look at it. I can tell you this is probably one of the most beautiful areas in our surrounding hills. And not a lot of people know what it looks like or what it used to look like. So I appreciate that effort and, you know, kind of getting some eyes on the issues. And I would like, you know, there's been discussion whether it's better here or SCV water, but I would like our water agencies to continue to assist to move some of this forward, because the degradation is sad to see, as is some of the governmental quagmire on it. So I support it moving forward in the appropriate manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Goodside. Director Atkins.
Thank you, Mr. Vergoots, first for coming and witnessing firsthand what I've been talking about. And I'd like to thank Ms. Planbeck and Sandra Cattell for adding their comments. There are a number of serious concerns, and also thank Director Goodside for her comments. I'm looking at this situation, and I know that the flow coming from Bouquet Reservoir is about 1.5 cubic feet per second, when it used to be 4 to 5, maybe even 6 cubic feet per second. And if we simply free that drainage of these invasive species and some of this overgrowth and the trash that you saw pictures of, we start from the bottom and move up. We remove wildfire fuel. We can slowly restore flow, because the creek will do its own work, scouring out and going back to its original drainage depth. There's a number of benefits. First, we'd lose the endangered species, and ultimately, Mr. Vergoots is right. We would have a maintenance obligation, because there's the clear need. There's a clear opportunity for invasive species to repropagate and choke that drainage once again. So we would. The bottom line is, as a society, we're deciding to spend $10 million or more to start the process of cleaning arundo and other invasive species out of the Santa Clara River drainage. For 1/10 that price, this particular creek can be cleaned out carefully, without the use of heavy equipment, which is what I would prefer. And it turns out the resident that Mr. Vergoots was talking about is a fisheries biologist that attended Humboldt State with me. I didn't know him then, but he's worked in the federal government for years and years, and has extensive experience in stream morphology and assessing habitat and how to improve habitat. So he is an actual credible resource. That's why he did what he did in front of his home. And that's what the picture was, what it looks like when it's restored, calling that a pilot project. And that's what the whole drainage could look like. I personally think that I believe there are 7 different campgrounds on Bouquet Creek. I'm not suggesting we reinstate them as campgrounds, but they certainly could be day use areas. And to that end, I'm lobbying the federal government and its representatives to see to it the Angeles National Forest staff and crews assist in this effort. So I'm doing what I can from that perspective. And I so appreciate Mr. Vergoots bringing this to the direct attention of the GSA, because there's a number of well owners, not the least of which is Lark Ranch, who's been trucking water to their client base for years. And SCV Water is in the process of putting a line up, a 12 or 24-inch line out to them. I think Mr. Cole knows the actual dynamics of that project, but we're basically laying a line to Lark Ranch when they have wells that could easily be rehydrated if we simply do this Bouquet Creek restoration. And it would take care of wildfire, it would take care of endangered species, it would take care of groundwater sustainability. It would be a five-way win. And that's the nature of the project. I won't belabor it. I just so appreciate it being brought to the attention of the GSA. And I really think or hope that there is a role for the GSA to play. If we can find grant money, either through SCV Water or GSA, that would be terrific. And it's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, and it would truly benefit the constituent base in the Santa Cruz Valley, especially those of the SCV Water. I'll get off my soapbox. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Atkins. I know that there are camp crews that agencies can hire to do brush clearance, fuel modification, and maybe even some invasive species removal with a little bit of guidance from a knowledgeable resident in the area. So there are certainly could be some, excuse me, never heard that before. Sorry, some car driving by with their a PA speaker. At any rate, so yes, hopefully there would be some options that we could look into in the future. Director Cooper, you have some comments you'd like to make?
Yes, I want to tell Director Atkins, thank you very much for taking the leadership in this, and Director Gibbs and Rick Vergoots for your help in this. This has been an important project, I think, not just for Lark Ranch and those people that are up there. The Department of Water and Power has to release 2,000 acre feet a year down that creek. That's what they're required to do. And that goes into our groundwater basin. So I think it's important to us that water continues to come on down, help support our local basin. And I think this is a major project that we should undertake in helping to bring that 2,000 acre feet in. It helps everybody along the way when we do that. So thank you all for this.
Thank you, Director Cooper. Yes, we can find a connection. Let's work on that. I don't see any other comments on item 5.5. So we're moving on to item 6. Do any of the directors have any requests for future agenda items?
I'd like the opportunity to revisit Bouquet Creek restoration in a future meeting. We might have an update in November. That's very possible. Certainly in January. I don't want it to fall off the table. We've got momentum. Let's keep it going. And I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Vergoots, could we add that to the agenda for our next meeting?
We will, President Natoli.
Very good. Thank you. All right. If there is nothing else, Secretary Kang, I want to make sure I've done everything I'm supposed to do today. And if nobody else has any other comments, I first want to say thank you, everybody, for hanging in there today. It was a little bit longer meeting than we usually have, but we discussed some very important issues today. And the groundwater sustainability plan is, first, it's our raison d'etre, and then we have a lot to discuss when it comes to how to manage the basin. So again, thank you everybody for hanging in there and sticking with us. I also want to thank the SCV agency staff for helping to put on these meetings, as you always do. A lot of work goes on behind the scenes to keep these up and running. And a round of applause for Secretary Kang, who keeps us all organized, and we definitely could not do this without you. So brava, very much so. With that, the SCV GSA Board of Directors is adjourned to sometime in November. Again, thank you, everybody. Please have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Uni. Thanks, President.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Uni. Thanks, everybody.
Good meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.